Yeah. So real quick, and we could just go back a slide. Just remember to introduce yourselves in the chat box. So today's agenda, so we did our introductions. We're going to go real quick to ways to engage. And then we're just going to dive into daily procedures with this. So this session today is all about OST programming in person. And it's just going to help you guys understand the different procedures because there's a lot of information going out there. So we're making it more geared to OST programming to help you guys understand some of that information. So we'll go through those daily procedures. Communication is really key during this time. Information is changing and flowing. So Tamaya will talk about communication with staff and families, communication and engagement with youth. And then you guys submitted some questions. Most of the questions have been answered throughout the presentation, but we'll go through that a little bit. And then we'll take live questions. Live questions will be answered. We do have a guest with us, Rebecca. She's a nurse and she's with the Department of Public Health, and she's going to answer all your questions.
All right, so quickly, I'm going to go over the ways to engage today during a meeting. If you guys will follow these rules and instructions, it'll help us go through this a lot smoother. Please make sure you guys stay muted unless directly prompted to unmute yourself. If you have a question, please submit them in the chat box. You're going to type questions. Please also put those in the chat box as well. Thank you. Let's get started.
Yeah, great. So next slide, please.
All right.
So we're going to go, something that's really important is the concept of cohort procedures. So this is something that we're going to really dive into. So a lot of this information is in the scope of work. So if you guys want to read it, it's really good. But me and Samaya worked on just making sure that you guys, the information is relevant for OST programming. So cohort should be a maximum of 25 people. So that's campers plus camp counselors. So ideally that's your one site director, site supervisor, 2 group leaders, and then the 22 youth.
Next slide.
And we're going to remain in cohorts for the duration of summer camp. So you are going to avoid mixing cohorts. So you have cohort A, which would be in room 101, possibly, examples. And then you have cohort B, which would be in room 104. So they should not mix with each other. They should stay on different levels and different areas. We'll get through if areas are shared, how to handle that. So each cohort should have its own space, ideally, and also have their own bathroom. If any space is shared, it should be really clean.
That's what it was.
Thank you. It should be clean before the next so ensure rooms are set up to keep social distancing, right? So some ideas could be assigned seats and supplies. So just making sure that everyone understands that it's 6 feet apart between each youth. And then for transitions, if you're thinking about it, you're going to be moving from different areas, right? So we suggest maybe using dots for the youth to follow. You could use other creative things. I do have some ideas for how, if you do use dots and you make them color coded, you can kind of have the transitions become a game in itself using the different color coded dots. Something really important is sign in and out procedures. A lot of you ask these questions, right? So you're going to identify 1 staff per cohort to sign in and out youth. Normally in the past, we asked all of you to have your youth sign in and out themselves, but just to avoid contamination of passing the pen back and forth, really just have that 1 staff person signing in and out the youth. And then you're going to identify a staff to conduct daily check-in procedures. So an example could be those temperature checks. There are documents in different formats that kind of show what check-in procedures could be, but mainly, definitely that temperature check. So you'll have your staff do that. Definitely remember to communicate again with parents about how signing out procedures would be, and then just explain it to youth. Staggered arrival and dismissal times or entrances per cohort. So we got an example. So you got cohort A, blue team, right? And then they can come in through the gym entrance, and that could be 8:30 to 9, right? So if you have two different entrances, maybe they can come in at the same time. If you don't, maybe you can stagger the times. But you have cohort B, which is red team, main entrance, 8:30 a.m. to 9:30. So it all depends on your capacity. What I really want to stress on is just don't call it cohort A, cohort B. Allow the students to kind of name their cohort. So maybe they're the Tiger team, or the Dreamers, or different things. Make it creative. A lot of this information is crucial and vital when it comes to procedures. But when it comes to OST program, we got to remember that flair, right? What's making OST fun? So just keep that mindful, not to call them cohorts, and allow the youth to kind of name their teams. And then ensure families wait 6 feet apart. An idea is to maybe use inspirational quotes, chalk to write them down, hula hoops or place tape. You can even laminate those inspirational quotes so they can kind of walk and stand on them as they're kind of bringing in their youth. And then asking families to wear masks. And having hand sanitizers or a washing station nearby, so as soon as the youth are coming in, they're washing their hands and getting ready for the day. This is a familiar slide. It's from when Dr. Stacy spoke to you guys in the past about some of the questions that you had. So I just put this slide in there, and I just want to go through it really quickly. So when you are doing those screening campers and staff for symptoms, you're doing that temperature check and symptoms check. So all this information is here, and of course this slide will be provided later. But when in doubt, please, the number, I'm not sure if it's on the slide, I can't exactly see, but the number for the Department of Health is going to be your go-to for when in doubt and understanding more so screening campers and staff for symptoms. So you're going to do daily temperature checks, staff and campers with temperatures of 100.4 should stay home. And again, all this should really be communicated with parents and staff and the youth as well. They deserve and they are capable of understanding, the procedure of what's going on when they're entering the building. Another, again, a repeat slide. Oh, there's the phone number. So please, that's throughout the slide. Just please take that number. If you have any questions about policies and procedures, they're like your go-to. They'll answer quickly if you have any questions. But just again, this is just information that was repeated that we decided to put in the slide again. So you're going to screen campers and staff for symptoms again. So there's visual inspections, and then there's exposure. So just again, when you get a chance, really just read through this, and if you don't understand anything, you just call the number there. But you're just looking for, visually seeing if they have flushed cheeks or rapid breathing. And then with exposure, it's just asking staff and parents if campers have been exposed. And again, you're communicating this to families and staff as well.
Luz, can I just jump in real quick about that?
Yes, sure. Yes. Hi, everybody. This is Rebecca.
I forgot to put my face in. Just about that phone number. So the reason that we want to make sure you all have that phone number is because we don't expect any of you to make any clinical decision. If you're looking at a kid and you're not sure if that visual inspection or the questions you're asking mean that they might have COVID, you don't have to decide that. If you're not sure, just call the number, explain what you're seeing, and the person that you're talking to will help you make that decision about how to keep that child safe. So that number is there. It's not so much to follow your group's policies and procedures. That's what your supervisors are for. It's more for those clinical moments when you're looking at a kid and you're not sure, are they just hot because it's summer and they're running around, or do you think they might have symptoms of COVID? And it's important you call as soon as you notice it, because if they do, they can get you very quickly. So keep that number on hand. Any questions about that? Okay, any questions, just put it in the chat. I'll take a look. Thanks, Luz.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Yes, so please take the time to save that in your phone and all your staff's phone, and have that information on handy. If you are doing those screen checks, just have that telephone number placed nearby, so you're not trying to figure out where to call. But again, thank you, Rebecca, for just clarifying that for everyone. So general guidance on masks. So masks are required indoor places and outdoors if everyone's less than 6 feet away from each other. Children under 8 are the exception, but please remember, social distancing, and just tell everybody, my mask protects you and your mask protects me. So getting into this is really important. So disinfecting procedures, right? So you want to identify a staff to conduct daily disinfecting procedures. So preferably maybe one staff per cohort, so you're not, again, mixing those cohorts. And then ensure that procedures include disinfecting most touch surfaces. So doorknobs, handles, and then at the end of the day, washing, like if you have masks, and washing all your masks at the end of every day.
She's emailed.
So I want to get a little bit more into detail. I'm not going to read you the exact definitions, but there is a big difference between understanding cleaning and disinfecting. So when you're cleaning something, you're removing, that surface germs, right? So I'm going to give you an example. So if a youth spills milk on the table, you're going to go ahead and you're going to wipe that off, right? You're going to take a cloth, you're going to wipe that down, and you're not going to see the milk anymore. But technically, it's not 100% clean at that point. It's not disinfected, right? So when you're disinfecting, you are putting the chemicals on there and letting it sit. So what's really important about, and really cannot stress, is just making sure that you're cleaning the surface first and then disinfecting, right? So you need to have what is called dwell time. So it's the amount of time disinfectant needs to remain on wet surfaces. If you're not sure how much the dwell time is, just really look at the label or read up. If you need to know what supplies are being sent out from you from PHMC, just take a look at that supply list and see what it is. But this is just something really important because you're going to be cleaning a lot, wiping down everything, and then of course disinfecting a lot more. So remember, just that dwell time is the amount of time, because if you're just wiping down surfaces, you're not disinfecting and killing those germs. Yes.
Luz, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Can I add one thing?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it was really well said. I just want to add that you should be disinfecting 4 to 5 times per day. It should happen throughout the day, not just once.
Yes. So just really adding that into your program schedule. And the reason why I suggested before to have one person doing that per cohort being in charge of that is just because they're going to be doing this consistently, constantly going around disinfecting areas. So just so you're not to overwhelm staff who are focusing on the youth, just having one person kind of just doing this, because it's going to happen constantly. Food safety procedures. So you're going to serve meals in classrooms preferably, just because you want to keep the cohorts again separate, and then required hand washing before and after meals. And then staff preparing food should take prior precautions, masks and gloves for preparing and serving food. And then ensuring that youth do not share meals. In the past, we had share tables, no more share tables for right now. So just be mindful that you shouldn't be sharing their meals, and just require them to hand wash before and after, and full hand wash, 20 seconds. So getting into promoting hand hygiene. So we want you, this is another thing that's going to be happening a lot again, right? So you're going to have the youth washing their hands when they come in, having the youth wash their hands when they go outside. So create a fun program theme song for hand washing to ensure youth are washing for 20 seconds, right? So we all know the happy birthday song. But if you are using markers, like I suggested prior, if you're using markers for transitions to getting in line, make it into a game, right? So everyone who's on the blue marker, you know, hop up and down for 20 seconds while our friend's washing his hands. And then everyone who's moving on up, you know, just keep making it into something because you're going to be having these youth wash their hands constantly. So create set hand washing times in the program schedule. So arrival, dismissal, before and after snack, when they're returning from outside play, when they're going into a new activity. So it's going to be a lot, so just try to make it as fun as possible for them. Social distancing. So create fun 6 feet markers. So like I said, you can use tape or write out inspirational quotes. A colleague of mine shared this cute little thing, like bears helping to promote social distancing. So as you can see, the bears are kind of showing where you cannot sit during these in these spaces. So you could probably do something like that in your classrooms. So instead of empty chairs, you got a little teddy bear sitting beside your kids, or it could just be other things. But I just think, again, with OST, just making it fun for the kids. You know, we have to do these things, but how can we make it fun? So we're going to show a little quick video on social distancing. So it doesn't seem like we can hear it, but we can kind of at least get the visual from this, right? So they're using hula hoops to kind of promote social distancing.
I'll get the audio. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. We'll just keep going, I guess. And again, all these links, when we send out the PowerPoint, you guys can take a look at it yourself.
Forcing social
noise.
groups to keep in session. Kids are getting a much-needed break from life at home at Mosey, the Museum of Science and Industry Day Camp in Tampa, Florida. Camp administrators had to implement lots of safety precautions in order to open.
How do we get the kids into camp without, you know, doing their normal touching and hugging? Because it's a summer camp family. We have many kids who return year after year. So it's like seeing your old camp friends every year. And it's exciting for them.
One way they're enforcing social distancing, hula hoops, to keep the littlest of the little ones 6 feet apart. X's on chairs help maintain social distance at tables. And when this kid tries to high-five his buddy,
Air high five, there you go.
kids sit solo at opposite ends of long tables when they're engaging in science experiments. And they space themselves out behind the fence to watch fireworks ignite as part of a science lesson. Masks are optional for campers, but mandatory for counselors.
Make sure we wash our hands.
Check out this daily schedule. Washing hands is part of the official routine. At 9:45, then again at 10:50. There are hand washing stations and hand sanitizing stations. And while the camp used to provide communal lunch, campers now have to bring their own food from home, and only 3 to a picnic table. So how do parents feel about sending their little ones to camp during a pandemic?
As long as they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and practicing social distancing and keeping things clean, you know, there's only so much you can do.
Welcome to camp!
Awesome. Just a reminder that that video does say that the youth aren't required, the youth are required to wear masks. Let's real quick kind of go through back where we were. All right, so emergency procedures. So you gotta create a plan if someone is sick. So again, save the number for the Philadelphia Department of Public Health. It is right there again. And I'm just going to real quick briefly go through the information that was provided by Dr. Stacy in the last session. If COVID-like illnesses in staff and campers, so it's, just the steps. So staff and campers who develop symptoms on site should be brought into isolation room and then immediately sent home. So this is the information, again, that Dr. Stacy provided. But just remember what Rebecca said earlier when I was talking about the other check-in procedures, that just to call if you're not sure how to handle that. But it is important to have these procedures, and again, communicate with families what this procedure looks like, communicating with staff, again, what this procedure is. And then again, of course, the number we put there again, and then it's again what happens if someone's diagnosed. So all children and staff in the same cohort who have come into close contact should be at quarantine. Again, reach out to them for more information. Persons should isolate and remain home until it's been 10 days since symptoms onset. Person is fever free. Just remember to have that number and save it. And then we put
really
this.
Fast. Oops, sorry, Luz. Can I jump in really fast? Because I had a clarifying. Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
I had a clarifying conversation with Stacy about this, and I'm sure Rebecca can offer advice on this too. So, this piece of, if God forbid there is infection at a site, a cohort they need to go ahead and quarantine. This is also where the cohorts become really, really important. So, and this is why I'm like, oh my goodness, how are the schools? I know we're going to get to in-person in schools, but how does it work? It's really complicated, right? So we're so used to, we have these OST sites, we have a site director, and they're like our principal, they're our mayor, right? This is why the site director just can't function the way it used to. They can't be across multiple cohorts, because if they are, and one cohort has an infection, it's not just that cohort that needs to quarantine, because now that site director has seen multiple cohorts, which is why the staffing have to stay specific to that cohort. I'm sure everybody understands that already, but I feel like it bears repeating. It's just like Dr. Stacy was offering the example of, it's like sex education, right? So you take whatever your partner had with you to other partners. Mm-hmm. So it's that same sort of public health concept of like, you're taking anything with you to other people. So if we ever get into an incident where there's an in-person program and there's a cohort with infection, what public health will likely do is try to see, was there any crossover at all? Because then multiple cohorts would have to go ahead and quarantine. Thanks, Luz. Sorry about that.
I don't know. Thank you, Karis. Yeah, it really is. If I can go back to the beginning of those slides and just stress how important it is to have those 3 staff members, the site director, kind of just overseeing and making sure that everything's going well within their cohorts, and then those 2 staff, and then just making sure that, again, that one person is in charge of cleaning, one person's in charge of, that signing in and out. So I'm going to go. So this is a question that was asked to Dr. Stacy in a previous session. So I just felt like we should kind of have it in the slide again. So the question was, in case of a staff person or student having COVID-like illnesses, does the entire cohort also have to leave camp and follow the guidelines for returning to camp? Or do those apply just to individuals who are sick? So this is kind of the response that was given. Only the individual who is sick needs to leave camp and follow guidelines for returning to camp. We strongly encouraging that sick individuals get COVID testing. And if that individual is diagnosed with COVID, then the cohort needs to be quarantined. And of course, again, that number that everyone should have saved in their phones is there again. And then just another question, again, that was asked to Dr. Stacy in a previous session that, again, we felt was relevant for this one. What should providers do if a family member or staff person or a child is diagnosed with COVID-19? Would a self-quarantine be required, and would it apply to just the individual or the entire cohort? So her response was, the individual who was exposed to COVID-19 needs to quarantine for 14 days. Contacts of contacts, right? Do not need to quarantine per the CDC. If the exposed individual becomes symptomatic, they should get COVID testing depending on when they were last at camp. The cohort may need to be quarantined. For more information, of course, again, call the number just for clarification. So now how do we talk to communication engagement, Tamaya?
Okay, how's everybody? We just talked about the logistics of exactly what we need to do as far as expectations for the sites. But now we're going to talk about how do we communicate with the staff and with the kids, and how do we make the situation a little bit not so stressful for the kids. One thing that we want to make sure we do communication with staff. Our staff meetings and our cohorts we're not going to mix any cohorts. So if you need to meet with all your staff, phone conversation, Zoom call, group text. That's how you guys are going to meet as the cohort A and cohort B if all staff needs to be met with together. Well, via digital, Zoom, group text, all right? Communication with families, you can go back to the communication with families, weekly announcements and updates. One thing that I enjoy doing via text is Monday announcements, letting the parents know what's happening during the week. Class Dojo, if that's a platform that works for you, emails, any platform that works for your site, that's how you're going to communicate with families. Provide parents with the daily entry checklist and procedure list. It's a link right there for the screening tool that when parents come, these are the expectations that the parents check. Did they check to see if the kid had a temperature? Did they have COVID-like symptoms? Those are the things, the questions that's going to be asked every day when the kid shows up with the parent for summer camp. You can go to the next one. All right, communication and engagement with youth. From day one, you want to speak with the youth about COVID-19. There's some, below is some videos. We're going to make sure we send these slides to you so that you can be able to look at these videos. But it's just explaining to kids in a kid-friendly manner of what social distancing look like, why we're practicing social distancing, we're helping each other to help ourselves. We just want to kind of like put it in a kid-friendly manner, not be so the kids don't be so stressed out about it. Yeah. Keep it moving. Communication engagement with youth continue. Non-contact greetings. So a thumbs up for a kid that's doing awesome work. Air high fives for your whole group of kids. Waves. Those are the things that we want to make sure we're teaching our kids on a daily basis so that they can remember that we are practicing social distancing. Washing hands song. I looked up on YouTube and found a couple of songs. And this one song right here was pretty cool. So when we send the slides, you guys will be able to see the YouTube video. Some activities that helps out, that are social distancing activities. Mask making for friends in other cohorts. Public art projects with motivating COVID safety messaging. Decorate personal water bottles. Camp songs or cheers with positive or essential COVID messaging. Hand washing competition with drums or music or singing counting out a full 20 seconds. Projects to make PPE for family members, etc. Those are some things that are some activities that are helping out with the community and us being safe during this pandemic and teaching the kids about COVID. All right, communication and engagement. Continue outdoor activities. Ensure each youth has an individual identifiable water bottle. The playground setting. Playground equipment should be cleaned and disinfected between uses. Videos that explain tips for indoor and outdoor social distance activities. This is a great video. It just talks about conflict resolution when you're out on a playground with the kids and the kids are saying, well, I want to play with the ball. No, I have the ball first. It's different strategies and also just ways to social distance the kids, make different stations so the kids can have fun activities that they play and the types of games that you can play that promote social distancing. Some social distancing games are soccer. The kids are just simply kicking the ball. Simon Says, where they can space out during Simon Says. Freeze dances, they can space out during that. Kickball, I'm not too sure about that one because the kids do have to hold the ball in their hands. But it's a link here that has a ton of activities for social distancing from grade level that we are going to make sure that you guys get. I looked on this website and it has a lot of great games, because at the end of the day, what are we going to do with our kids, and how are we going to keep our kids engaged and make sure that they're having fun while practicing social distancing? So that's super important. So I encourage you guys to check out the link. Move on.
Tamaya, I'm just gonna share that the page to the link really quickly so people can kind of see what it looks like and all that stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so they have grade levels and they have tons of games that you guys can play. It tells you the areas that you can play in. Although with cohorts, you stick into one area. And cohort is traveling cohort. Just one cohort. But yeah, these are the activities that you guys can take to your programs. I see some fun activities, detective, really cool stuff.
Those are some awesome resources that Tamaya found for you guys. I think that's really exciting. And thank you, Sam. Since outdoor activities are highly encouraged, looking at those activities are very great. That Tamaya found for all of you. Looking at that resource, I just get like excited. So we're going to take some questions. We do have Rebecca on the line with us, who's going to help to answer those.
So there were some questions in the chat box. I'm just gonna refer to them as you enjoy my background noise. There was a question about children who are asthmatic or obese. They might exhibit signs of exertion or heavy breathing and panting. So Rebecca, could you respond to like what advice there is for those youth?
Sure. So if a kid has a history of asthma, they should absolutely be wearing a mask as required. If that child develops symptoms of asthma, they're having trouble breathing, or any child is having trouble breathing, then they should take off their mask so that they can be able to breathe better. And then you would follow the normal procedure that you would have as far as health and safety of a kid if they're having trouble breathing. Does that answer the question?
I think that was Charmaine. I'll let Charmaine decide if that helps her answer the question. But Rebecca, would you say it's all right to have like a breathing station where the kid, like if they're having, if they're overly like sweating, or they're just they just need a moment to take it off, like they can go to that space and it's safe for them to just take a break?
Absolutely. I think if it was socially distanced, like if not all the kids go to the same breathing station, take off their masks and breathe together, that would totally defeat the purpose. But if they're by themselves over like in the corner in the shade, spaced out real well, I think that's, maybe more than 6 feet. I think that's a great idea to have them collect themselves and relax. But yeah, it's important for you all to just look up the difference between heat exhaustion and a COVID-like symptom, because they're different. And you're used to seeing kids get hot and sweaty in the summer. And if you check them in the morning and they didn't answer, they had no to all of the questions of COVID-like illness, their caregiver confirmed that if they're able to, and they don't have a fever, then you should be okay. And the one thing that came up in another training with the Parks and Rec camp staff that might be helpful is if you think a kid might have a fever at any point in the day, it doesn't have to be in the morning, pull them aside to an isolated area and check their temperature. And if it's close to 100.4, have them rest, relax for 15 minutes, and then recheck. And if the temperature is still above at 104 or higher, that's considered a fever for a kid. And that would, then you would go into your procedure of calling the caregiver to have the kid go home, and make sure that they're coming back to you and finding out if they have any COVID-like symptoms or a positive test as soon as possible, so you can alert your cohort.
We also had a question about parents signing in and out. So somebody wanted to know if parents are required to sign in and out as well as the students.
Can I jump in on that with Naomi? This is Karis. So
Yep.
Rebecca, we typically for our funding require that that a young person, when they're a certain age, they're signing themselves in, or a parent, if it's if they're littles, the littles have their parents sign them in. Is it preferable from your perspective that we just let a staff person, visual recognition, mom, dad, grandma's here dropping off, and go ahead and initial, rather than saying, here's the clipboard, here's the pen? Like, because we'll change our rules if you think from a health perspective it's safer for the staff just to manage it.
If the answer this has come up many times, the best answer is that they should bring their own pen. And not everyone's going to bring their own pen. So I guess if you're required for them to actually sign, and that's a requirement, you're in charge of the program. So if you want to make that an actual requirement that parents have to bring a pen with them, it's part of their, they have to bring up whatever, like a lunch, whatever they have to bring, they're required to bring their own pen. They have their own pen and they walk up to a clipboard that's 6 feet away from everybody else and they sign in, that's totally fine. And then if they forget their pen and you hand them one, just disinfect it and let the dwell time happen, and then you can use it again.
Great, thank you, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question from Rebecca Channing. She asked if staff should only clean, or can helpers clean spaces as well?
That's a good question. I'm going to follow up with Stacy to confirm, but I think that it depends on the disinfecting. If they're just cleaning, like Luz did a great job explaining the difference between cleaning and disinfecting. If there's like spilled milk, they can definitely help clean that up, that's for sure. But as far as disinfecting, I think that would be better for the person who's trained to do that. Partly because you'll be that it'll be done well. They'll follow the procedure of the dwell time. They'll make sure that they're actually getting all of the surface. And also some of those products, if they get on the hands and then kids kind of put stuff in their mouths or whatever, that could, maybe be toxic. So cleaning for sure, kids can definitely be involved in cleaning things up, and that might take some pressure off whoever's doing all that disinfecting. If kids are sweeping and wiping things down just to get dirt off. But for disinfecting, I would recommend that the person who's designated to do that, just focus on that so that they do a good job and they get into a routine and a rhythm about it.
Rebecca asked a follow-up question: do the disinfected surfaces need to be wiped, or can it air dry? Or is that kind of dependent?
Yeah, it'll depend. I think you're saying it'll depend on the product. So just read the label. Whatever products you all get from wherever you're getting them, just make sure you read the label, and it'll say exactly how to use it. You spray, if it says spray it on, leave for 5 seconds, and then wipe off, do that. If it says spray on and leave, then that's what you do. But it'll depend on the product.
There was a question further up about like the use of basketballs that are like passed around, or softballs. Like, is there any recommendation on how to use those or disinfect them?
So ideally, it would mean that if the basketball was passed from one kid to the other, you would disinfect it between, which is why that list that Timia found is so incredibly helpful for you all, because it has games that doesn't require that. If a kid's playing with a basketball kind of by themselves for a little while and then they're finished, it can be disinfected and then another kid can use it afterwards. I will double check, because that makes a lot of things really impractical for you all. I believe that the advice is that if an object like a pen or a basketball is passed from person to person, even within a cohort, it should be disinfected. But I'll double check, because that makes your days a lot more a lot busier if that is the case. That does change your activities a lot. So I'll confirm with Stacy and get back to you. And then
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, this comes up all the time. So wearing gloves doesn't make you magically immune to COVID because you don't get COVID through your hands. So if you're wearing gloves and then you're passing things back and forth and putting your hair up and touching your eyes with your gloved hands, you're getting COVID, you're getting exposed to COVID just the same as if you didn't have the glove on. So gloves help remind you that there's COVID around and to be careful of it, but it doesn't putting on the gloves doesn't sort of like magically make you immune. You should still wash your hands after you've been wearing gloves for any activity. Wear the gloves while playing. Yeah, you can wear the gloves while playing and throw them away after and wash, exactly as you're saying, Pilar. Just make sure that while you're wearing the gloves, the way you get COVID is touching a surface that has the COVID germs on them and then touching your face, your mouth, your nose, your eyes. So if you do that with gloves on, you can get exposed just the same as having gloves off. Does that help? Cool, thank you.
Rebecca, there's a question. Yeah, you saw it.
Yeah, about it depends on the type of surface. Metal is different than cardboard. The weather outside, it may or may not make a difference, but that's like being studied and tested all over the place. I think the thing to think about is not to get into that level of detail. Just remember that on any surface, the virus can be present. So if you touch that surface and then again touch your face, or touch an object and then touch that object again and then touch your face, that's how you get it. It does stay on surfaces, inside, outside, wherever. It's a different amount of time for a porous surface like cardboard versus a non-porous surface like metal. So just remember about the transmission more than exactly how long it'll be there.
We did discuss playgrounds a little bit, but Rebecca, do you want to go a little bit more into that about like having to disinfect the surfaces and all of that?
I believe that the guidelines that you all have says to disinfect the playground between cohorts. So if there's like bars and swings and whatever, that you just have to wipe them down between cohorts.
And yeah, Samantha made a really good point in the chat about reminding children to not touch their face. So again, if you're touching a surface and then touching your face and then touching that surface again, you are susceptible to the virus and all other germs. And then Karis asked, and only use a playground that only your program can access.
That would be ideal. I think it would be hard to disinfect an entire playground between uses. But if you rotated by day and it was cleaned at the end of the day per cohort, that might work better.
I wanted to ask a question that if I type, it'll make less sense than when I say it. So I'm going to try to say it. One of the things that were anticipated, I think Eileen Flannery here is on the call from the Children's Village. So they are kicking off before everybody else. They're a big site. They're going to start with a smaller number. And I think we're seeing that with the Parks and Rec system and then other providers. Our camps are smaller this year, but it's going to be a small group first week and then sort of gradually increase. So I guess this is more of a statement than a question. If you're enrolling, you're obviously adding young people to a cohort. If you have young people drop out of camp, if they're no longer going to attend, then you can add those young people into vacant slots. Just make sure that they're in the same cohort or the same team consistently, that they're not, there's an opening in group B or group A. Just make sure that they're consistently in that same cohort if we get into a summer where we end up having different kids rotating in and out.
Yeah, and I can just like reinforce what you all were talking about keeping those cohorts separate. So if, for example, what you just mentioned didn't happen and a kid on Monday was in one group and on Thursday was in a different cohort, and there was, God forbid, a positive case in the first one, that would mean that double the amount of kids and then their families are all possibly having to quarantine and are all possibly exposed. So it can kind of like explode exponentially how many people are at risk of getting COVID if the cohorts aren't maintained. And if you didn't do the brilliant idea you all have of having your site directors be specific to a cohort, and that one site director pops in everywhere, then they've sort of like exposed everyone. So it can get big really, really fast, which is why if you look at it, which is why we have people do all of this, precautions and social distancing, because one person connected to one person isn't just me connected to you, it's everyone who I've been in touch with connected to everybody that you're in touch with. So that's why it can become so many people so fast.
Any other questions? Last call. Absolutely, Brandon.
So I want to, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I want to go back to the one site director and multiple cohorts. Are you saying that if there are two cohorts in a building, that the site director should, as far as managing and supervising, not necessarily go to the cohort areas, but speak to the cohort leaders 6 feet apart, or through a phone call, or through a staff meeting at the end of the day? Did my question make sense?
So you're saying, like, should you, for staff meetings, like,
Well,
shouldn't it be?
meetings, if something were to happen on the premises during the day, you have a site director and you have two cohorts. Let's just say a bad example, a kid could get sick or get injured, in the one section of the building. The site director, everybody has first aid training, but the cohort person would talk to their site director, maybe if they needed help. Are we saying that the site director should just immediately stay out of the area and only communicate with the cohort leaders via phone that day, or down the hallway yelling directives? You understand what I'm saying? Because I understand if you move from one cohort to the other, even if you're peeking in to see how it's going, you probably should not do that. As a summer camp director in the past, I know I've been in all my groups, playing with the kids or, just talking to them. So I'm just sort of getting a better understanding that the site supervisor or the director stays completely away from the cohorts.
This is such a good question, and I'm glad that you're bringing it up again, Brandon. So I'm going to respond, and then Rebecca, feel free to jump in. So in talking about the school year with our providers and I'm thinking to myself, well, we've got to get to a place, right, where we can have a regular site director. So I went to the public health department and I said, hey, our site directors are kind of like principals. They don't have their own group that they're responsible for the whole. So that means that they can do just what you're saying. There's an emergency in a group, they can go to respond to it. And the very clear response to me was, no, that's not the way to go. Because once you have, sorry, I got a little echo. Once you say, for example, have a staff meeting, right? So something bad happened, some sort of incident happened during the camp day, right? And then you huddle folks at the end of the day, staff across sites, or the site director visits with the group it impacted. And then the next day you find out that somebody had been infected, then the whole thing has to shut down. So that's why the way we put out our instructions for the summer is that every cohort has these 3 staff, which equivalents, thanks for pulling up this slide, Naomi, It's the 2 group leaders and then the person that serves as the site director or the supervisor. So God forbid there is an incident, you have that 3rd person who's going to be able to react to it. And like Tamaya mentioned earlier, if you need to have a staff meeting at the end of the day or huddle normally, yeah, those things should happen over Zoom or over the phone, because the result, if there is cross interaction, God forbid there's an infection, the whole thing's gotta shut down. I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to jump in on that at all.
Yeah, that sounds great. I wasn't sure what your policy was. It sounds like you've developed that, and it makes a lot of sense. That's absolutely the safest way to go, is to keep your cohort a cohort. That's just those 25 people stay together, site director / supervisor included, and then have your staff meetings virtual or over the phone. 100% agree.
So then in the event of, let's say, an incident happens, kid falls down, scrapes their knee or whatever, and we have to report it to the site director, can we use like walkie-talkies? Should the group leader send a text? Like, how is it okay for the site director to walk into the room with those 11 kids and provide assistance? Like, is there any guidance on that?
Sorry, I think I'm not understanding how you all have this figured out. Am I understanding that within your cohort, you have your 22 youth, your 2 group leaders, and then 1 person who's the site director / site supervisor only for that cohort? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's
okay,
correct, yeah.
and that's who you would go to. They would only be for your cohort. They can come there if that site director and site supervisor is only assigned to that 1 cohort. Then of course they can. They're part of that 25 people. That's your camp family. So
okay.
to speak. That's your bubble.
And then Eileen has this follow-up question. Isn't the contact under, I think you mean under 6 feet? Okay, so I think what she's saying is contact is defined as talking to somebody for more than 15 minutes in less than 6 feet of proximity. So if you've had under 15 minutes of contact, then it doesn't count. So for example, say, Rebecca, I'll pose the question this way. Say tomorrow at today Eileen interacts with one of her direct service site staff who is with cohort A, and Eileen has nothing to do on the daily with cohort A. And tomorrow, Eileen or her staff person finds out that there's a possible infection. If Eileen only talked to that person for 5 minutes or less than 15 minutes, in the eyes of the Department of Public Health, would you see that as full contact, and would you recommend a quarantine of all folks associated, even if it was a short amount of time?
Right. So that exact question is the exact type of question you would call the hotline for, because the folks on that hotline have up-to-date information on whatever research is coming out, because it's coming. The type of research that you need to understand a disease like COVID happens over 10 years, and we've had to do all that research in like 3 months. So that is the kind of question that you would call that hotline number for, because there's other specific circumstances that you would want to talk about with that person, like what were they wearing a mask, what type of mask, how far apart were they standing, what are their contacts. There's a bunch of other questions that you would have, but I will add that it's actually 10 minutes, not 15 minutes, and to just try and maintain that social distancing for under 10 minutes if possible, if there is an emergency, yeah. But I would just try and really maintain those cohorts as separate, because it makes it much clearer and much easier to understand what's happening if you just really keep those cohorts separate, regardless of knowing that 10 minutes, 15 minutes thing. Because I think if you start going down that road, then people will start to cut corners in other ways. And I think it's important to just remember, stick with that 25 people cohort. And if a specific question like that comes up, call the hotline, because they can ask you the specific questions that they need for that exact circumstance that you may be in.
Thanks, Rebecca.
So just process question. Brandon had a question. So if 2 cohorts of 22 kids, so if I have 2 cohorts of 22 kids, are you saying I would have 2 site supervisors, 1 for each cohort?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Eileen.
Kenya asked, what about board games? How are the campers supposed to interact using them?
I can again double check with Stacy, but I would guess that board games they're not a socially distanced option, and they require a lot of disinfecting. So my guess is that might not be the best thing to do, but I will double check and get back to you.
Karis or Sam, do you want to chime in on that a little bit about like if that's in, you know, any of our guidelines?
I mean, we're using the Philadelphia Department of Public Health Safe Mode summer guidelines as basically regulatory guidance for this. So anybody who's operating summer program needs to follow those guidelines like the law. And, you know, it is clear, but that you don't want to do too much sharing, but some of it's inevitable. So I think, like Rebecca said, we'll follow up with Dr. Callum, Dr. Stacy, get her take on the board games and the basketball and get back to you. My other reaction to all of this is that we may, for those who are doing in person this summer, I know there's some of you who are listening in and learning in anticipation of the fall, but for those who are doing activity this summer, you know, Tamaya got us kick-started with that list of options for socially distant games, but maybe that's something that this group can either meet weekly or have like an email chain where you're sharing out. Most creative group of Philadelphians, so you're going to find the safe ways to get together and have fun in socially distant ways. So I think that could be a next step in addition to when Rebecca talks with her colleagues to get more guidance on the board games and basketballs.
Yeah, so I know like our programs use tabletop activities a lot for transitions or when we end activities early. So this might be an opportunity where we have to think out of the box as far as like they have their own individual games. Like maybe they're playing tic-tac-toe instead of, you know, chess or checkers, or they have a virtual way of playing chess online. Like there's another thinking outside the box as far as like, you know, when we have them playing puzzles or we have them playing Monopoly, it's something that is often touched by different groups of kids. So that's going to need to be disinfected more often. So if, you know, I mean, Rebecca's going to get back to us, but in my mind, if you're willing to disinfect before and after the use of every little piece that they're using and all, you know, all of the pieces of the game, then think about that as, you know, what the process is going to be like.
And that the kids will be sitting close to each other for a long period of time.
One of the things that's in our summer guidance, you know, we as the city can be good at developing complex rules. One of the things that we put out, and I'm going to put the summer guidelines in the chat box because this has been to the executive directors, and I know there's a lot of direct staff on this call. So, you know, we stay in our cohorts of 25, but one thing that we've asked for folks who are doing in-person programming this summer to do is to make sure that even for a cohort of 25, that when those young people and staff are inside, there's enough room for them to spread out. So ideally 2 classrooms so that there can be max when you're inside groups of 11 in a room so that you can spread out. We do have some sites that have really large like gym spaces or multi-purpose rooms. And so a cohort of 25 may spread out inside that one room. But in our summer guidance as the funder, what we say is make sure that when you're inside, you can spread out as much as possible. Ideally 2 classrooms, no more than 11 kids in each. And then, you know, if the way we run summer camp, and I have so much admiration for folks who are diving in, is that we move kids through clubs and experiences all day. And so we know that that cohort can move around to each other's classrooms when they're inside for clubs, but not move to a different cohort or to a different cohort's room. So I'll pop the funder sort of summer guidelines in here so you can see it. And Naomi's also put the safe mode guidelines from the Department of Public Health. So our guidelines from OCF, from the Office of Children and Families, really go around funding, which I'll share. And that's where you see cohorts of 25, when you're inside, be in smaller groups. And then the guidelines for summer camp, copy of the safe mode guidelines that Naomi just popped in. That's where it goes really in depth into what we've been discussing with Tamaya, Luz, and Rebecca today. And I will say, for those of you who are on this call that aren't running in person this summer, we've been told by Rebecca's colleagues to expect that this summer camp guidance will remain largely the same for youth programming guidance once we get into the school year. So these cohort ideas, so we are learning and really grateful for the folks who are jumping in person now to help us continue to learn in a safe way.
Any one? Oh, sorry. I just
no. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I think it's really wonderful that you all are jumping in to give something for kids to be able to do after this tough time. And it's wonderful that you all are following these protocols well, and that you're focusing on mental health in a separate training. And I think that one other thing that came up is to remember that each of you are role models for each other and for kids. And so the way that you handle your own experience of dealing with COVID in this shared space, their kids are going to watch every single thing that you do. And so each of you are role models for those kids. And also, it's not even just for camp, because they may be going home to a family where they're the only one that has group activities out of everybody at home. So they're going to bring their best practices that you're role models for back home, and it'll, you know, hopefully spread out to their families. So I just want to commend all of you for jumping in and being flexible as things need to change. You may find that some of this stuff has to be updated after one day. So I just good luck. Admirable.
Any other questions? We did have a lot of, just really quickly, we did have a lot of questions about kind of that social emotional piece, and how not only on kind of the practical level do you deal with the summer that we're having, but more of on an emotional trauma-based level. And we are working with consultant Creative Praxis to develop a series of trainings around trauma-informed care, both virtually and in person, for both virtual and in-person programming. So we are hoping to have our first workshop next week, and we'll give you some more details around that.
I guess the only thing that Parks and Rec, the things that came up that they did were they kind of like demoed how to disinfect for everyone, which was useful. I'm trying to look back at my notes. And they were, I brought it up already actually with you all. I wanted to make sure you were aware the difference between heat illness and a fever, and what to do if the thermometer reads 100.3 or 4 and the kid doesn't look sick at all, that you have them wait 15 minutes and recheck. But a lot of that stuff is very similar. I think it's all very similar. I think you guys are well set.
Karis, did you have anything to say? I feel like I may have cut you off. Sorry.
Well, I just was asking that Parks and Rec question.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, I'm the nervous one. I'm like, how much more information can we get? No, the only other thing I would say is to the providers on the call, like Naomi, Lou, Samantha, Tamaya, are really committed to not just doing a training today, but being there throughout the summer. So please do continue to say, this is what I need to hear more about, and this team will be hungry to pursue more information and to consult with Rebecca. It looks like we did get a couple more questions. If you want to take those, Naomi.
I am muted. So Stacy asked, with a site that has more than one cohort, how do you suggest safe storage and distribution of food when using a refrigeration unit? So are there any answers to that?
I mean, COVID isn't a foodborne illness, so you're not going to be sharing the actual food, of course, but I think it would just, if one cohort has access to that refrigerator sort of at a time, you just disinfect the hand, whatever you touch as a high touch surface before you take the food out. I'm not sure about if the question of what to do with, like, if there's leftover food that has been exposed to a cohort, do you put it back in that refrigerator? My guess is the answer is no, but I can check for you. Can you explain exactly what you all want to know that I can ask?
Stacy, if you are still on the line and want to unmute yourself, or if if the question was answered for you, but yeah, if you're still here and you want to unmute yourself, you're more than welcome to.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm here. Oh, I have a echo. Hold on.
Let's see.
Mute yourself. Okay, thanks. No, I think that was pretty helpful. I'm just thinking that in some of our spaces, we have one refrigeration unit where we'll be putting all of our food. So just trying to maintain the safe distancing. Obviously, we would be going in and getting the food at separate times, but I just wanted the idea of wiping the handle down was really helpful. Just some of those little tips that you don't necessarily think of are certainly helpful. I'm guessing that you're right. We should dispose of all food at the end of the day, as opposed to putting anything back into the refrigerator. Is that what you'd suggest?
Well, I'm going to check with the folks from Parks and Rec, because they had some, I didn't pay attention closely to it in the training, so I'm going to find out for you, because they had some program where they could give whatever leftover food was, they could give it to them, and they deal with disinfecting it and redistributing it in a safe way for COVID. So I'll try and see if they can share that information, and I'll pass it on to this team, see if they can get that to you.
Okay. Yeah, and Stacy, from NDS, at least on the NDS side, I mean, they're usually pretty strict with how you're supposed to, like, use the food to the next day and use that first, and all those rules. Like, they're being much more flexible. So if there's any leftover meals, those can, like, be sent out, like, to the public. Like, you can give it to the kid so that they can take it with them to go home, or, like, it's not to be used the next day.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sam.
We have one last clarifying question about sign in and sign out. So are staff signing students in and out? And I think the answer to that question is yes, right? Like, visually?
So I'm looking at that question. I'm going to be totally candid and honest. I need to go back and look, and anybody can feel free to educate me. If this is a rule around the sign in and sign out, that is a PHMC rule, or if this is an OCDL rule around who signs in and signs out. I just want to get to the root of that, because I don't want to give an instruction that contradicts any of the regulatory bodies. So I'm thinking about Stacy and Eileen, because they've been working. There are some of our OCDL experts with PHMC on the line. If this is the OCDL requirement that little ones have parents sign in, or that, I guess it's an OCDL requirement that there's a multi-signature layer. There's like a staff and a student, or if that's just a city enforced, I need to get to the root of that, and then can commit to get back to this group so we can get clear on what we expect with sign in and sign out. We owe you clarity. Fast.
Karis, I'm going to check the regs, but as far as I remember, that was a city created
thing.
Yeah. That was something back in the Safe and Sound days that was created, and we've run with it ever since.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna check. I'll commit to checking with PHMC, having them check in with their attorneys. I know that this is something. So God forbid a young person does leave the program site, that there's some onus on just beyond the provider, which is why I know it feels like an easy question to just say, no, like, do it safest. But I do just want to check it out with PHMC and their attorneys, and then we'll get that in a provider all provider email. We'll get that clarity about if we're going to change our policy on sign in, sign out.
And I'll ask PPR too if they can share maybe even their whole slide deck, or specifically their check-in procedure with you.
That would be great. Thanks, Rebecca.
Sure.
Sam put some solutions to that question, just real quick solutions in the chat box as well. So if there aren't any more questions, we will end this workshop. The workshop has been recorded, so we'll send out a link to that recording as soon as possible, and then we will also send off the PowerPoint slides. I will say, you know, with all of this, when in doubt, call the number that we have listed in the chat box for PDPH. And if you have any questions, of course, you're able to contact either myself or Luz or Tamaya around some of this stuff. So anything else from anybody? All right, Samantha is putting some of our emails in the chat box, so please copy and paste those as you need. And everybody head to lunch now. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.